This video is of a conversation I had with Professor John Harris, a highly respected phonologist who I was lucky to talk to. Jeff Lindsay mentioned 2 or 3 years ago that he'd like to introduce us at some point, and that opportunity finally came after a lecture John gave at UCL on the summer phonetics course that I was lucky enough to tutor on. John's research interests are in theoretical phonology. I actually read one of his textbooks a few years before this YouTube channel became popular, but also in historical linguistics, so I've stuck to that topic here mostly, just because it's one I'm less likely to make mistakes in and make myself look an idiot in front of John.
Don't worry, that's the end of the break now, so okay, that means they've got nothing for another 40 minutes, I think.
So, as I said in the introduction, I'm here with John Harris, who I was very lucky to be introduced to by Jeff Lindsay a few weeks ago while I was tutoring on SCEP, and John had just done a lecture. So, as I said to him before we started filming, I'm feeling the imposter syndrome creeping in here, which I'll hopefully be able to hold at bay for the duration of the video. But I thought, as you're Irish and you're a phonologist, it might be interesting to approach Irish phonology, Ulster phonology in particular, and phonetics, because it's something that I recently, because I didn't know much about it, I made a video where the idea was that I'd sort of go down Ireland in 3 strips, just trying to get a sense of the diversity without any prior knowledge, and then I'd look at the literature afterwards and see how much I'd got right. As you can imagine, I got a lot of things wrong. There were a lot of holes in my understanding. So it's, yeah, I think this would be a very interesting opportunity to talk about that. And obviously you have an interest in historical linguistics yourself. So as I mentioned over email, a lot of the time when when anyone puts reconstructions of London English from the sort of 1600s online, one of the comments that often comes up is that it sounds kind of Irishy. And obviously a lot of that is just impressionistic things like rhoticity and stuff like that. But then some things, people will be tapping into things that are genuinely kind of Ireland specific nowadays. So, for example, I think a lot of reconstructions have quite a front start vowel, so like R rather than R, which still exists in some parts of Ireland, although not Ulster, I don't think.
It depends, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends, yeah.
And things like there still being a distinction between the vowel in Fern and the vowel in For and stuff like that. So there are clearly some things that are genuinely just well preserved in Ireland that aren't very well preserved elsewhere. And obviously with Ulster, there's also the Scots angle to it as well. So there's the Scottish vowel length rule and all that kind of stuff. So I thought an interesting one to start with would be the distinction, the sort of Foot-strut split thing. So in southern England, and now in a lot of major English dialects, there's a distinction between 2 short lax vowels, one of which is and the other of which is I've heard people say that foot and strut in historical terms aren't actually the best, or foot isn't the best example because it was formerly part of the Goose lexical set, so it's a bit complicated. So I sometimes say the Foot-strut split or something, even though I know Wells chose foot because it was, or no, they both have. I don't know. Maybe I'll edit that out. I don't know. Okay. Anyway, in any case. Where in southern England there was a split between these 2 short lax vowels, whereby roughly they lowered and unrounded unless it was adjacent to a bilabial sound, I think was the general rule, although there are lots of exceptions. How does that look nowadays in Ulster?
Okay, can I first of all say that it's a real pleasure to meet you finally, because
thank you very much.
I've been watching your videos over for a long while, and being able to meet you there in the summer was great.
Thank you very much.
Finally.
Ditto, obviously, yeah.
And so I think a good way of approaching that question of the foot-strut split is to think about three different kinds of systems. And you can probably tell by the fact that I had to think about how to pronounce those two words. I actually don't have anything like that. But so as you said, you've got the Southern English pattern, which is now the one that you get in standard British English and General American, which has got three vowels in goose, foot, and strut. I have to think about those as well. So that's goose, shoe, to, food, and then foot, put, wood, and then strut, cut, blood. So that's the Southern pattern, and it arose as a result of a split, as you said, between the foot and the strut vowels. And if you go to the north of England, at least the kind of traditional vernacular north of England, you get the original pattern where foot and strut have got the same vowel. So that's a two-vowel system in the north of England. If you go up to Scotland and Scottish English with its history of the Scots language, there are also only two vowels in those three lexical sets, but it's distributed quite differently than in the north of England. So you get the goose vowel includes goose, food, but also good and wood, right? And then the strut vowel has strut, blood, cut. But there is no independent foot set. Now, if you go over to Ireland, the basic pattern, at least in the southeast, in the south and primarily in the southeast and Dublin, the real vernacular pattern is more or less like the north of England one. Again, there are only two vowels, but they're distributed more or less in the way that you find in the north of England.
Right.
If you go to Ulster, that means anything north of Carlingford Lough, and that's not just Northern Ireland. It includes the historical provinces of Ulster that are in the Republic, like Donegal in particular, and to some extent Cavan and Monaghan. You get a more Scots type system. So I've got the goose vowel in goose, food, shoe, but I've also got it in good and book, right? And then you've got the strut vowel with blood, cut, etc. There's an extra wrinkle in the north of Ireland that makes it different from present-day Scottish English, which is that there's a bunch of words, around 35 words, where you can switch between the goose vowel and the strut vowel. And the polite pronunciation is the goose vowel. So that's why the word foot is a terrible word for me as the name of the lexical set. Yeah. So that's one of the words that actually switches for me and for in the north. So the polite way of doing foot is to say it with the goose vowel, so foot. But the real old school vernacular way is to pronounce it with the strut vowel, so it's foot. And there's about 35 words, I think it is. So foot, foot, would, wud, that's W-O-U-L-D, should, should, stood, stud, butcher, butcher, cushion, cushion, right? And so you know, there's a lot of people who will switch between the two. Some people who will only use the goose vowel, and then some people who will only use the strut vowel in those ones. So that's basically the pattern in Ireland is more or less north of England pattern in the south and this Scottish pattern in the north, with this extra kind of little wrinkle to do with switching. Yeah, you mentioned the wrinkle to do with is code switching the right? Yeah, I mean it could be code switching, or I mean it's sociolinguistically sensitive anyway. Yeah. But I'd never heard about that before. I think I'd noticed sometimes that some words had the strut vowel, which I wouldn't expect them to from my phonological system. But I'd never noticed it was, obviously, I just haven't spent enough time around Irish people to have noticed. But then even with my own dad, I think it took getting interested in phonology to realise that put and cut genuinely rhymed for him, because I just assumed that they were different vowels, but they were more similar. Which I think must be normal.
you must sort of interpret other systems in terms of your own system.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's interesting. Even in standard accents, standard British and general American, you'll find variation up in that part of the system, up in the northeastern part of the vowel diagram. So whether you use the goose vowel or the foot vowel in a word like room, I believe.
Yeah, room,
People have a choice between room and room.
yeah.
And there's a couple of them, I think hoof and hoof.
Yeah.
Is that possible? Yeah. I don't have any native intuitions about those. But
No, I have a friend who I get the I don't know this, I've never read this, but I get the impression that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that maybe in Wales, maybe especially southern Wales, that there's more words that take the vowel.
Oh, right.
Like roof, for example.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But I have a friend who has pretty much my accent who defaults to the
okay, right.
on a lot of words.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure why. I think his mum does it as well.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting if you look back at the orthopists, the early phoneticians back in 16th, 17th centuries, you can see that the distribution of the words across the emerging split between foot and strut was a real mess. And for a long time there was quite a lot of variation or even disagreement about which words belonged in which set, and it settled down. It must have settled down before the settlement of North America, the colonial settlements, because the North American pattern is pretty much the Southern English pattern. So, but before that, it was kind of chaos, for a couple of centuries.
Yeah, I think the same is true of the Track-Bath split. From what we can see, that was quite messy at first as well.
Yeah.
But I'm just gonna, as it's early on, I'm gonna periodically
just check. Yeah.
One thing, I'm not sure if this would apply to Ulster Scots. I'm not sure exactly what its distribution in Scots is. I know it mostly from a Northern English angle, but I've definitely heard it described in Scots as well. Because parts of Northern England and Scotland had a different input system to the Great Vowel Shift, you end up with cases where the goose vowel, presumably something like or in Middle English, has fronted and then raised. So I've heard like gis for goose, and then in Northern, very traditional Northwestern English, like geas with a centering difference.
Oh, right. Okay.
Presumably from the same thing. So I wonder, is that... I've never known where exactly that fits into the pattern. Whether there's another system again that coexists with the others, or whether I'm just missing that's maybe a precursor to the modern Scottish system.
Yes, I mean the Scots as opposed to Scottish system is exactly what you just said. So the original Beck, long O fronted to E and then raised to I, so you get gid for good. But when Scottish English emerged, after the Union of Parliaments, and when people switched from Lowland Scots to English, basically what they did was to retain, I mean, as far as I understand it, they basically retained the Scots vowel system, but completely reshuffled the distribution across the lexicon.
Right.
So they basically went for the nearest, phonetically nearest vowel that would work as an English correspondent.
Right.
So instead of saying gid, which belonged in the is set, they then switched to the goose vowel, actually the goose is a bad example, but whatever the Scots vowel was, So it was a massive reshuffling of the lexicon rather than a bunch of sound changes.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because I read the Alexander Hume thing from the 1610s. I just typed the Briton tongue into Google and it comes up with it. But I think it's called like the orthography incongruity or something like that.
I liked your reconstruction of
thank you.
video. It's great.
I'd hate to watch that back and see what things that you've told me that now conflict with what I said in the video. But one of the I looked back at it actually. I was worried that the thing you'd said about your distribution of Foot-strut goose, whatever, would conflict with it. But I now realise it's still confusing, even in light of that, what he says, because he gives one vowel which he says is in. I think it's almost as if he makes a point of picking three words that are in different lexical sets in Southern English: good, blood, and food, or something like that.
Yeah.
And says there's one vowel in those, which is true in
Right.
Scots.
Yes, in Scots. Yeah.
Then also, he says that he's describing the vowels represented by the letter U, and I think he gives the example of mule and muse, sort of implying that's still distinct from the goose food vowel. So I suppose because that was originally something like ew in Southern England, I think, wasn't it, like muse?
Right. Yeah. I think those are mostly French borrowings, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the borrowing, the way that they were borrowed was just different up and down the country.
Yeah.
But then I think it just left me confused. Where did the strut vowels go in that system? Or
well, I mean, the real hardcore Scots that you can still hear, right, in Lowland Scotland, if you go out of your way to find it, and you can find it in parts of the north of Ireland, is that, everything that had short O went to ah.
Right. Oh,
so
okay.
pot and pot. In fact, I think that's where putting comes from in golf, right?
Is it the same word as
literally it's putting?
Oh,
yeah,
I see.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I wondered about that. Why that?
I think so. I think all the original short O ones in Scots went to went to ah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. What else was I gonna? I think another. Oh, sorry.
No, you were going to talk about short ah, weren't you? And
was it the trap path?
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot what I said. Do you remember did I say anything else about that, or did I just say I was going to mention?
I think you were saying that it was, when people hear the reconstruction of early London English, they, and they think it sounds a bit Irishy.
Yeah.
One of the features is, front ah rather than a back ah.
Yeah. Well, my understanding of that is that it's kind of, if you look at it from a Southern English perspective, it's kind of the first stages of the trap bath split, like a broadening. I might be looking at that completely the wrong way, but the way I've been looking at it is ah before undergoes this lowering, backing, lengthening, first before and then before the voiceless fricatives. Is that about right? Or
I mean, of course, once you include the vowels before R, you've got this extra complication of the dropping of R in a lot of England. It's clear, people talk about broad A, and it's clear that there are two phonetically distinct properties at stake here. One is the lengthening, so the trap vowel is short, and then you find that vowel shows up as a long vowel, as you say, before certain consonants. Mm-hmm. But then there's the quality of the vowel, which I think is a separate issue.
Yeah.
Whether if you take a word like bath, where you've got a long, that's one of the lengthening environments. The voiceless fricative, as you say. So bath and pass. There are many accents where you get a long vowel there that's not back, so you get bath, pass, and that's true in Ireland, and it's also true in England, in the south of England,
in the southwest.
The southwest, and right on the rural south, and even I think the urban, like the deep south, So the bath, the broadened one, the broadening is what John Wells calls the bath broadening, is the change in the quality of that vowel from a front vowel to a back vowel. Yeah. And it's clear that those two things are separate developments. Mm-hmm. The lengthening occurred first, and lots of accents just have that, and they give you bath. Mm-hmm. And then you get this backing to bath. Wow. And so that backing must be relatively recent, right? Mm-hmm. Because it didn't make it to Australia, for example.
Yeah, that's true.
So, the lengthening made it there, so you get bath, and So the backing must post-date the major 19th century settlements
Yeah.
in the southern hemisphere. Yeah, in Ireland, I mean, it's a little murkier as you go further west in Ireland because uh, it got to do with how recent the influence of Irish is and how recently English, was adopted. But on the East Coast, it's certainly true that you get that lengthened pattern. You get before a voice is fricative, you'll get the long so bath, but it's usually the front pronunciation. So
Right.
Dublin and polite Belfast will have bath, pass. In Belfast, you do get backing,
Right.
but that's not. That's everything gets lengthened. Once that vowel has been lengthened, then it gets backed in real hardcore Belfast vernacular. But the lengthening is not just before a voice is fricatives, it's also before nasals, for example. So for hand, you get hand.
Oh, I see.
So bath, hand, those are a real kind of deep Belfast pronunciations. And it's interesting because you might have thought that the Bath pronunciation would be the polite one because it sounds more like the Southern British one, but it's not at all.
It's a simplistic way of looking
So
at it.
the polite one is Bath and pass, and hand is long, but it's not back, in polite pronunciation.
Yeah. I think I'd heard the hand thing before, and I'd wondered if it was because I know in Scots it can be
Horn. That one I'm pretty sure is a Scots thing. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah, you mentioned something in Skep, which it hadn't occurred to me before. Just as an aside about the lengthening before fricatives, about how it makes sense mechanically.
Yes. Right.
Was it like because it requires more ballistic control or something to make a fricative rather than to just make a plosive?
I mean, that's I think it's a plausible story that if you're making a fricative, it's actually guided. So you have to guide the tongue up to making a narrow slit between the moving articulator and the passive, the static articulator. So it's a th or a f or a s. So you have to guide it up there and then get it back, right? Whereas with a stop like t, p, k, you can just
whack it.
That's a ballistic one. So the transition from a vowel into a stop is quicker than the transition from a vowel into a fricative. So it's quite likely that what happened is that listeners misinterpret the lengthening effect as actually part of the intention of the vowel, and over time then you get this
it spirals.
So you get trap, bat, lack, before the stops, and then you get bath, pass,
Path.
path, laugh, and the same thing happened with short aw.
Oh, cloth.
Yeah, the cloth one. Yeah, and that's another giveaway for Ireland. Actually, that's an old pronunciation that, as you probably know, if you look at the first Daniel Jones dictionary.
Oh, I didn't.
Jeff Lindsay and I had a look at this, and the first Daniel Jones dictionary for RP, for received pronunciation. So early 20th century polite Southern British. He has the long vowel in cloth and off, and of course that then became very old-fashioned. And but that pronunciation was must have been the prevalent one in the southeast of England. It was certainly the one that made it to North America. And it made it to a lot of the seaports. Right.
I'm going to very quickly put my hat on the camera.
Okay.
And then I'm very sorry.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Would you rather go inside if it's?
It's up to you and the equipment.
Yeah.
I'm happy enough if it's if it's like this.
If it starts properly.
Then we'll have to do it.
Go inside. But yeah. Sorry, what were you saying, Daniel Jones?
Yeah, the short. Yeah. So Daniel Jones had the long aw in, and it was before voices fricatives. That's the main one. Cloth, loss, off. and then subsequent dictionaries, he switched to the lot vowel. So this is the lot versus the thought vowel,
Yeah.
right? Um, so that cloth pronunciation made it to North America and Ireland, and actually it seems to be characteristics of seaports.
Yeah,
So
I thought
yeah,
that because I think of it as like an East Coast urban American thing, like
yeah,
right on the coast
yeah.
kind of thing. Is it the same in Ireland?
Yeah, both Belfast and Dublin have it, and it's not just the East Coast in the States, right round, I think, to New Orleans. It's the same kind of
Oh,
same sort of thing. So it must have been like the basic,
yeah.
pronunciation, um, and it's interesting because it's kind of been fossilized in Ireland. South African English has it as well. So
Yeah,
um, you
my
know,
friend.
and I don't think Australian English has it, but
Not that I'm aware of.
yeah, I. It's interesting if you ever have the misfortune to travel with Ryanair,
Hmm.
you should listen to the safety announcement,
Mm.
which I have recorded, by the way, because I was really interested in. Yeah, so it's a very polite Dublin 4 accent. It's a
Mm.
woman speaking with what we call a Dublin 4 accent, so, like posh Dublin.
Hmm.
And and in posh Dublin, that thought vowel is raising a way up, the way it is
Like
in the
to,
south of England, to
oh,
thought,
like to all. Oh, that's
thought,
interesting.
thought, and as a way of getting away from the traditional thought, kind of
Ah,
pronunciation.
right.
So she has off, loss,
Hmm.
take off, and loss of cabin pressure.
That's really interesting. I can't imagine. It's it's an experience I have a lot when I don't know if you've gone on YouTube and looked at those sort of there are random like vox pops where they've gone to somewhere in Ireland in the
Yeah,
1960s and just got everyone's opinion on something in the
yeah,
street.
yeah.
And sometimes I hear it's because I haven't looked into hiberno-English as much as I should, but I sometimes hear combinations of features that I just can't believe I've
Really, yeah,
never heard.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't think of any examples,
Okay,
but
yeah,
that
yeah,
would
yeah,
be
yeah.
yeah, that would be one of them.
So I've got that full, that lengthened all. So for me, the thought class
Mm,
contains a heap of words that you don't get in the thought class in standard British English,
right.
and it's mostly the ones with voiceless fricatives.
Hmm.
Um, but there are other ones with nasals and voice stops. So and some of those you got in Cockney. You can still
Like
hear in
gold.
Cockney. Gold.
Yeah.
So God for me is in the thought set,
Oh, I
and
see.
gone
Okay.
is in the thought set,
Hmm.
as opposed to gone or yeah, God.
So it's a lot not in the thought set then,
No.
as
So
like
it's
set.
basically the voice to stops that have preserved the short vowel in lot,
Right.
lock, fox. And again, the quality of the vowel is not just, so it's short, but it's also this unrounded vowel,
Hmm.
just like you get in North America.
Right.
So that, the classic New York City pattern where you got a hot dog.
Yeah. Yeah.
So dog, there's another good example of a voice stop giving you the long vowel. So I have a long vowel in dog and thought.
I'd always wondered about the dog. I can't do it. Dog
Dog
and
or
like the
the dog.
gold and
Yeah.
stuff, and why in those
Coffee.
environments?
Yeah.
Yeah. What the conditioning factor was
Yeah,
there?
Roger Lass has a great chapter on this, because he's a New Yorker, and
Oh,
he
I
has a
didn't know
really really neat reconstruction of how the lengthening must have happened.
that. I don't know why. He's probably the historical linguist that I've read the most of. He
Yeah,
was
yeah,
your PhD supervisor,
yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
he? And
yeah,
I just I just had this reconstruction of him in my head as some like 80-year-old very posh southeastern English person.
Oh no,
I think that's
he's
just because when
yeah.
you read a textbook, unfortunately, that's
I
the
suppose,
idea.
yeah,
That, well, maybe that's just my
yeah,
southeastern English sort of
yeah. He's
hegemony
he's
coming
from
through.
New York City.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Oh, it's funny because whenever I imagine these researchers, I think they've got a face in my head,
oh
but I've
yeah,
never seen a picture of any of them. It's really strange.
yeah, yeah. It's not
Strange how the
it's
brain
not
does
usual,
that.
or at least it wasn't usual to put pictures of
No.
researchers on books. I think it's changed a little bit now, but
Hmm.
yeah.
Like you, for example, I didn't know what you looked like at all before I.
I think it's probably better to keep it that
No,
way,
no, no. I I think the same was true of Jeff actually when I read English After RP. I can't remember what.
Oh,
can't
right.
remember
Yeah.
what got me to.
Yeah.
I must have just seen it mentioned somewhere, but I'm not sure where. But anyway, yeah. So one thing in particular with the is that still recording? I think it should be. With the environments where that R has sort of broadened in my accent, pre-rhotic, which then became non-rhotic, obviously. That's something I hear in certain Irish accents, like in far rather than far. But
Yeah.
I've never associated that with Ulster, but I don't know if that's right or wrong. Is it?
Yeah.
Did you hear the front?
Yeah,
on
like in
Ulster,
Belfast, it does tend to be back there, but I think in more country accents you can get a front.
Okay.
Yeah, front one. Yeah.
I was listening to an interview with Lisa McGee, I think she was the writer of Derry Girls.
Oh yeah.
For that video I did.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed was that she had the broad ah, or the not like the lengthened ah rather.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, it might have been backed as well
Uh-huh.
in situations where I've retained the trap vowel. So, like where I'd say character, I think she said with what sounded like palatalization as well.
Yeah.
Character.
Character. Yeah. So she's from Derry, I guess, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. So Derry has it's right slap bang in a much more deeply Scots area historically, from the point of view of the accent.
Mm-hmm.
So it has quite a lot of Scots features, and in many varieties of Scottish English, you don't have a contrast between short and long before R.
Right. Okay.
So character and car will have the same.
Okay.
Character and car will have the same vowel. Yeah.
Makes sense. So it's just
Character.
back
Yeah.
to
Character
Ulster,
and car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
So Carry and Starry, Carry and Starry are merged, or failed to split.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably, and so Derry has quite a lot of that. Yeah, Donegal the same. All that kind of area up there has retained some of those characteristics. And palatalization, you mentioned character and carry. That one was all over Ireland and particularly prevalent in the north. It's quite. It's really on the way out in Belfast. It sounds very country now, and people, it's kind of a shibboleth in a way, but that's real 17th century. That's a relic from 17th century. It made it to the Caribbean, it made it to the southern United States, and
it seems to have totally. I can't think of it's mentioned in phonetics texts. I don't know if phonetics text is the right word, but phoneticians' descriptions from southern England, I think from 16 or 17.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that it was widespread and polite, actually.
Yeah.
Polite speech had it. And
was the pattern I'm thinking of, I can't remember who it was. I need to just write a list of phoneticians and what they've said.
Yes.
But the pattern I'm thinking of was before front vowels, I think, like I, ah.
Yes.
So, I think the examples they gave were can, or can, get.
Yeah.
And then something else.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but is it mostly low vowels?
It's just much more noticeable, right? Because a dorsal consonant, so one made with the back of the tongue, is automatically going to be fronter before a front vowel. Yeah. So the cut in keep is really different from the cut in cop, right? So because the tongue is front in anticipation of that front high vowel. It's when you get that fronter position before a low vowel that you hear the transition. Yeah. And that's the y, right? That's why you get carry. And you hear it even more if you've got that is backed, like in kiar, then it really kind of jumps out at you, right? Yeah. And then that is really different from the cub before short aw, or
without the palatalization.
Yeah, which doesn't have the palatalization. So corn.
Yeah.
Corn versus kiar.
Yeah. When I first tried to do it with the sort of traditional Southern English trap vowel, the sort of slight, the ash
Yeah,
symbol
yeah.
one. It sounded to me a little bit like something that I've heard in some varieties of RP where it's slightly diphthongized, which I assume is just a random
Oh,
coincidence. Like,
right.
I can't do it very well, but like I'm
I
awful
see.
at it.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Can.
I mean, I'm
can.
pretty sure that because it'll be a fronted dorsal, because it's a front, it's very, it's a front vowel.
I'd always thought about one thing I often give as an example of phonological systems kind of tending towards symmetry is the fact that the Southern English short vowel system, which has 6 vowels, has historically kind of had 3 obviously front ones and 3 obviously back ones, like I, U, E, O, A, A. And then the Northern English system tends to have the trap vowel kind of in the middle rather than at the front, in line with it being 5. I'll put diagrams on screen.
Yeah.
But then I realised that kind of gets messed up when you look beyond England a little bit, because the Scots, well, I suppose I'd have to look at the systems on like a vowel quadrilateral. But I was thinking, what is your kind of strut style vowel? Is it a lot more mid, kind of rounded, more like
Yes.
oh?
Yeah, it's more like the American, the one that's it's more like the way wedge really is.
Oh, I see.
Pronounced on the IPA chart. That wedge symbol, of course, is used in British dictionaries for a pronunciation that can be really low and open and unrounded. So, particularly around here, my neighbours have, who are from here, will have, strut. It's really an unrounded open vowel. It's not actually the wedge vowel at all.
I'm very glad to hear someone more qualified than me say that, because I'd always thought, like, it's one of those things where I think, am I just bad at hearing the differences, or is this just a off transcription?
It jumps out at me. I mean, Jeff Lindsay is of the opinion that in standard British English at the moment it's kind of reverting to
the wedge.
To wedge.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, a proper wedge vowel is going to sound like, General American, strut. And that's pretty much what I have. But in Ireland, you can get a much more rounded version of that, strut and cut and blood. And then it really sounds like, Caribbean style, a vowel.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think I was thinking along the lines of maybe the fact that it's not entirely low means that my nice neat theory still makes sense. But, But then I suppose the symmetry is just a general tendency anyway.
Yeah.
And also I was wondering, it got me thinking, does it make sense to, that might be a stupid question, but does it make sense to distinguish between short lax vowels and like long vowels in Ulster?
No, it doesn't. I mean, that's a really good point, because the symmetry is really hard to establish because a lot of the vowels in the system have predictable length. The 2 main factors that determine it are the nature of the following consonant, which is what we've already seen in the Bath, Bath versus trap, and how many syllables are in the word. So if a monosyllabic word is more likely to have a lengthened vowel than a disyllabic word, a 2-syllable word. So you'll get a short vowel in. I mean, it's kind of like English, really. You get a short and carry, and a long ah in car or caw, right? So those 2 factors mean that a lot of the vowels in the system sometimes appear short and sometimes appear long, and that's true, for example, of the high vowels E and U for me, and that's basically a Scottish pattern where E is long before a voiced fricative, or at the end of a word. So you get freeze, seethe, sees. Those are long, and at the end of a word like see, but short in seat, before a voice stop, like seat. Food, good are both short. and yeah, before every other consonant. So if you want to go back, it actually messes up the whole story about that we started with about the strut goose thing, because the goose vowel is actually short a lot of the time, right? So it doesn't fit the pattern of the long oo in the English style system.
Yeah, I think there is literature on the history of like the development of the Scottish vowel length rule, which I've sadly not read yet, which I should have done before this. But
I think in Scottish it's more pervasive, that
like it affects
that
vowels.
pattern, it goes right down the system. And it's a really great pamphlet from 1860. It was published by some minister in Belfast, essentially trying to correct people's pronunciations back then.
Oh, right.
And he's got a whole list of words where he's complaining that the vowel is pronounced short when it should be pronounced long. And it's basically the Scottish vowel length rule.
Right. What, as in he's complaining about the Scottish
vowel length rule? I think he was the first one who ever went into press about it.
I wonder how long. I suppose it at that point it must have been something that some people did and some people didn't do. Is that
it's so pervasive. I mean, it's really, really deep seated, and it's it's below the level of sociolinguistic awareness. People don't style shift with it,
right?
The way they would do with say foot and foot. People just have a short e in seat and lead and feed. And nobody, I don't know people who go and try to say feed or food. But those are really the only two vowels that in Ulster English have that. Right. The fleece vowel and the goose vowel are the two that really show that vowel length rule.
I wonder how deep. Well, I suppose it's hard to say, but I was going to say I wonder how the diffusion, if it even is a diffusion from Scotland, or if it's just something that happened independently. But
I'm pretty sure it came from Scotland. And it seeped over the border into Geordie, so Geordie has it.
Oh yeah.
So it's part of a Northumbrian pattern that's very old. It's probably Scandinavian. That's what Roger Lass thinks.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. That makes sense. Well, I say that I don't know much about Scandinavian vowel length.
Well, I mean, vowel length in most of the Scandinavian, the Germanic Scandinavian languages like Norwegian and Swedish, Icelandic, vowel length is tied up with stress and is predictable.
Right. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah, so it probably massively predates the guy complaining about it.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, and it'll predate the plantation of Ulster, which was 17th century. So it'll go right back, I think.
This is probably another kind of amateur question, but with any kind of area where a Celtic speaking population has had English transplanted, like Wales, I always wonder how much the sort of phonological system there is in English is obviously just a regional variety of English versus something that's been influenced. And I want So I'm thinking in terms of the major differences between, or the noticeable differences between sort of Ulster and then like Southern Ireland. Just things like, for example, like the mouth vowel in Ulster being quite distinctive. Like, I can't do it very well, but like I.
Well, that's
stuff like that. I wonder how much that's just sound changes that have just diffused and internally since English was became widespread in Ireland versus a Scots influence versus, I'm not sure. Do you get the impression that like non-Scots Ulster English pronunciation is obviously Scots influenced or obviously Irish influenced in a very large way, or do you think it's most of them are just regional developments?
Yeah, I think.
I've asked that really stupidly.
No, no. I think that the main difference when it comes to the Irish language and the effect that it's had on English in Ireland, the big dimension is really east to west rather than north to south. And basically, the further west you go, the more recent is the influence of Irish on the English language, and that goes as much for the north as it does for the south. The interesting thing is that if you look at Irish dialects, so Irish Gaelic dialects, the Ulster dialect is really, really quite different than the ones from the south, the southwest. Connacht and Munster, and and interestingly, I mean, there's a kind of aerial. I think what historical linguists call an aerial characteristic. So a lot of the characteristics that you find in the north of Ireland, you'll also find in Northern Irish, in the Gaelic of the north of Ireland.
Right. Okay.
In Donegal. And similarly, if you go to Munster, you'll find similar things. So things to do with vowel length and stress, intonation. Actually, sentence intonation is another one. So it's that it makes it quite difficult to tease apart. The influences of Irish. Yeah, Irish has undoubtedly had a big influence on English in Ireland. And it's just more obvious the further west you go.
Right. That makes sense.
I mean, this palatalization. Irish has this distinction between palatalized and non-palatalized consonants. Slender and broad consonants, and the palatalized ones in the north sound really like the thing that you get in Kiar, right?
Oh, okay.
And
so the retention of that could...
Yeah, so some people have argued that it comes from Irish, but then we also know it comes, from early modern English. So there are these kind of reinforcing effects, make it really difficult to tease apart, distinct inputs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe it's another case of me thinking about it from an English perspective of north-south being the
yes, I mean, people tend to think that way. That's kind of natural. People think about, Northern Ireland versus the Republic. But Northern Ireland is not a linguistic area. It's it's a political area, and the dialect boundaries happen to coincide with part of it. But it's certainly not it's not an isogloss, It's not what dialectologists call an isogloss. The big line goes more or less it goes right across, that cuts off the historical province of Ulster, including Donegal. And
sorry, that's it. There we are. Carry on. Sorry. There's an insect getting me.
That's one of the hazards around here. Yeah.
I wouldn't have drawn so much attention to it, but I recognised that my eye line was faltering. Sorry.
There's also parrots, right? Parakeets.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I guess you have them in.
We've got them as well.
Every year there's more of them around here. So.
Yeah, there were none pre-COVID where we are.
Oh right, so it's really recent.
Yeah. There aren't that many still, but you hear them sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was that gonna? One thing that we talked about briefly, it's just a little thing, but the allophonic variation of the face vowel, it was allophonic variation, wasn't it? Was it word final?
Yeah.
I was going to add something else to it actually, but if we start with, is it that word internally it's the ear, and then is it word finally it's like air, something like that?
No, that's exactly it. Before consonant, you get this in-gliding diphthong. So the standard one is an up-gliding a, face. You get an in-gliding one that's face, which it shares with various other accents, a Geordie, Caribbean. And but at the end of a word, and this is different from the other accents, at the end of a word, it's a long monophthong.
Mm.
And in Belfast, it's an like day.
Mm.
In the country, it tends to be a day.
Yeah.
And so at that point, because the distribution between those two vowels is predictable, you would say they're allophones of the same phoneme.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's complicated by the fact that if you take a word final, a word that ends in this and then add a suffix,
Yeah.
it retains the
Mm.
So if you get day, and the plural of day is days.
Mm.
So you get these neat minimal pairs, like days is the plural of day, but days is D-A-Z-E.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that, of course, that you do get in Ireland
Mm-hmm.
is the preservation of the EA words.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
I hadn't even written that in my notes. Yeah.
yeah. So words like BEAT. So there's a vernacular pronunciation all over Ireland where you'd say bait,
Mm.
rather than beat,
Mm-hmm.
and bake instead of beak,
Mm-hmm.
tay instead of tea,
Mm-hmm.
K instead of key. It's not just EA words. There's also some French words and proper names. So decent, decent,
Mm.
Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So that old pronunciation, that A pronunciation is really old. I mean, that's early modern English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is it? Would you transcribe it with just E, like the E, A? Or would
Well, I mean, it's interesting. To all intents and purposes, you would assume that it's merged with the face vowel, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would say you have a choice between using the face vowel or the fleece vowel with a bunch of words.
Yeah.
But actually, when I started out as a grad student, we were working on this vowel in Belfast, and we discovered that some speakers, at least for some speakers, the quality of the EA vowel was not exactly the same as their
Right.
face vowel, and we called it a falsely reported merger. So that
Right.
when they were saying bait and bake, they were actually using a slightly different vowel.
Yeah.
And we thought it was probably some historical thing, that they were preserving some historical route that vowel took before it merged
Oh,
with
I see. Okay.
so that they were giving you an older pronunciation of BEAT, before it merged with BAIT.
Yeah. Yeah.
But with hindsight, I think that might be a little far-fetched, and there's some other reason for the speakers differentiating these, and I think it's really got to do with, in these days, you'd call it the way people store words in their heads, and there's a model of how people do that called exemplar theory. So which means that when listeners just hear words constantly, that they store every single instance or episode when they heard that word. So they've got a memory cloud of hundreds and thousands of occurrences of hearing this particular word, and those words like bait, BEAT, and Jesus and decent, they'll hear them under slightly different sociolinguistic circumstances than they'll hear all the face words.
Right.
And I suspect that's really, really what it is.
I see.
It's really a usage thing rather than a purely historical preservation thing.
So in that case, would you say that's an instance where the idea of a phoneme not breaks down, but is insufficient, like overly simplistic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so. The phoneme is a really useful concept for relaying information about differences between accents or writing. But it's not how people store speech sounds in their heads.
I was just saying before I realised the camera had switched off that one example. Well, we were just going through examples from our own accents of where the concept of the phoneme seems to not quite capture certain aspects. So I say hour for the unit of time, and then hour for the what do you pronoun.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you were saying I and
Yeah, I think for me, I is different from I, meaning yes.
I. Is it a length?
I think it's a quality difference.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, actually, Scots has a pretty robust distinction between I and I.
I think I've heard about this.
Yeah.
And it's a phonemic distinction.
Yes, it really is. So you get minimal pairs like guy, which means very, and guy, a bloke.
Right.
And yeah, and in Scottish English, that is now, those two vowels were hijacked as kind of allophones of the same phoneme. So you get tight versus die, right? I versus I, but they're in complementary distribution. They're predictable, generally speaking. But you get some of these, and you get that in Ulster Scots as well. You've got that distribution is the same. So I versus I.
Yeah, that I think I'd always just assumed that was an allophonic thing as well, because I think it's just. Well, I guess it's just because just of the dominance of southeastern English in linguistics. I don't know if you'd agree, but just not approaching the system on its own terms, but rather coming at it from how is this similar to the systems that we've researched a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a natural tendency, I think, and it's something that you have to beat out of the students in phonology 101.
Yeah. It's something I've done in videos as well. It's just like how, because if I can't sit there for 8 hours approaching it on its own terms, the shortcut is
the shortcut is to go.
But it's of course it's a one-way ticket to mistake land.
I think in Scottish English there's a lot of variation across different words that have the what's the John Wells lexical set for I? Price, the price set. Jim Scobby's done a lot of work on this in Edinburgh, and so in Scottish English you can get a long I in oblige, whereas you'd expect it to be oblige, because of the consonant that comes next. So there's quite a bit of variation in Scottish English between I and I that breaks the pattern of the vowel length rule. Because where you get I is generally where the vowels are short, and you get I where the vowels are long. But I think because in Scots these really were separate phonemes, these were available really as two different categories.
I see.
Unlike with E, to much lesser extent with E and U. And that means that you're kind of free in Scottish English to choose which words have which vowel. That's not. I don't really get that feeling in Ulster English. That you don't have that same kind of freedom, I think.
Right. Do you think that there's so you think it's more allophonic in Ulster?
Yeah, it's much more regular. I mean, I couldn't say oblige, right? Oblige is going to be.
I wonder if that says anything about the chronology of it versus,
I think you're absolutely right. That the more regular these things are, I guess the younger they are, right? So they've had less time to break down, and that's actually true of the to go back to the trap bath split. That's also true of that it's for in Ulster English the distribution of the long versus short is almost categorically predictable. So you can, it's not. So you've got anything with a voiceless fricative is going to have a long whether it's got a short or a long vowel in British English is irrelevant. So you've got a long in pass, right? But you've also got a long in gas and a long in mass, which you don't in Standard British, I think, right?
No, you're right. Yeah.
So as soon as you've got a voiceless fricative, you've got to have the long one. The only place where that breaks down is where you got words of more than one syllable.
Right.
So you've got things like grammar versus drama,
Right.
right? But that's just a handful of words, really.
What would you say in passenger? I suppose
Passenger short, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
At least in the Belfast system, yeah. Yeah, so it's got to. That's where the two syllable thing comes in. So it's not just that the consonant has to be a voice that's fricative. It's also got to be at the end of a word.
Yeah. It's the same.
Yeah.
I guess it's the same in
Yeah.
Ireland.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
With a couple of exceptions like coffee,
Yeah.
with the short R.
Yeah, I've heard that
Whereas
in like old musical recordings from London as
Yeah.
well. Coffee.
Yeah. I have a good friend around here who is from London, and he sings a lot of old music hall
really?
songs, and he has all of those old long R words, like cough,
Yeah.
you know,
cool.
for cough. Yeah.
Is it hard for you to say cough with a short vowel?
I can't. No, so that would mean putting in the lot set, and then it would be cough. That's not. It's in the thought set. That's
Yeah.
cough. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think why. I need a list. I keep running into. Oh, yeah. I was going to say something else about face. I know that's another one that in Scots, it has a bit of a weird history in conjunction with some instances of the goat vowel. So, like in stone, for example.
Right. Yeah.
Which, in Southern English, and now generally in this is presumably what's gone on to affect most major dialects of English. There's been in Old English there was a low back vowel, something like R, and then this seems to have raised and rounded, it changed in some way in the raising rounding direction by the time that words in the face lexical set started to appear. So I think they appeared either from loaning from French or from open syllable lengthening. Is that
okay? Yeah.
I think so then you have this distinction then between like face words with something like and then goat words, stone words with something like or, and then that distinction's maintained, so we say goat and stone. In my accent, most English dialects have that distinction, but then I think in some varieties of Scots the vowel in words like stone remains low and unrounded, and then is joined by face words.
So
that
yeah, I think
staying.
what happened, from what I recall, is that in Scots the long the goat set was as you said, historically low and round, and then it moved up to mid, and it in Scots it then fronted.
Oh, okay.
So it went from home to home and stone, that front vowel was retained in some accents, that front round
the rounded one. Okay.
but then it unrounded in a lot of Scots. So you've got hame and stain, and then it merged with the face vowel.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I was wondering the situation of that in Ulster, but that makes.
Yeah, I mean, you still hear hame and stain in Ulster Scots and broad Ulster Scots.
I suppose that's something that would have happened probably before by the time Scots got to Ulster anyway.
Yeah, that's way before 17th century.
Yeah, that the pattern of fronting and then unrounding. That's a lot neater actually, because then that goes with the goose vowel as well.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So goad to get to get, you know, good to get and home to hame. You know, I said the lengthening of original short in bath and pass, and the lengthening of original short in words like off. It also extends to
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it's essentially the same set of environments, the same set of consonants. So, voiceless fricatives lengthen the originally short a vowel. So you get dress, dress, press,
Oh, I
beth,
see. Okay. Okay.
beth. But before, say, voiceless stops, you retain the short vowel, and you get bet and let.
I see. Okay.
And so, just like trap, in really broad Ulster, Lagan Valley, you know, Belfast and down the to the southwest of Belfast, you'll get a mid-ingliding vowel in the for the long one, dress,
Oh,
dress, you know, 10. But you'll get a very low short vowel in for the short environment, so bat, bat and lat.
Oh, I see.
You know,
Okay. Oh, wow.
yeah, so this it's really phonetically different, right? Low and short, and mid-ingliding long. And yeah, that's pretty much predictable. It's really kind of regular.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting with them being dragged so far apart, but it's still being regular.
Well, you know, whether or not you still want to say they're the same phoneme is really a problem for phoneme theory rather than a problem for the system. Because if the lowered vowel actually merges to some extent with the trap vowel.
Oh, okay.
Particularly for before velars. So
Like beg and bag.
yeah, beg. Yeah, beg is the long one, right? You know, which is the word for bag and the word for beg. And then you can get knack. You know,
I see.
NECK could also be KNACK. Trek and track, the same. Sex and sax, the same. Sex, you know, we're the same.
Yeah.
So it looks like a split, actually. Yeah.
Where they've joined or they're joining the trap lexical set kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of broad Lagan Valley style. And actually Scottish, the Scots system does that as well. So trek for... The trap vowel tends to be very front and very... and quite raised before a k and a g. Sorry, certainly front before a k and a g.
Back.
Yeah, beck. You know, beck is that's
So-
pretty old-fashioned, but it's there. Yeah.
So is the when the dress vowel does lengthen before voiceless fricatives, that's still distinct from the face vowel, isn't it? Dress
Yeah.
I'm doing it very extremely.
The one place where that where you do get a collision between them is when that face vowel is word final, right? So if you get a word like days, you know, day plus z is days, but that sounds pretty much like DES, you know, Desmond, days.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right, so whether that's fully merged or not, I'm not sure, but yeah, potentially it is. Yeah.